Governor Larry Hogan of Maryland, and he is here with me now. Thank you so much for joining me. Happy New Year to you. Let's start with what polls are showing about Republican voters. They overwhelmingly believe the election lies that fueled the Capitol attack, and Republican candidates across the country are playing into that belief and trying to win primaries that way. So can American democracy survive when these lies have become so deeply ingrained in your party?
Well, it's a great question, Dan. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I continue to speak up and tell the truth about, what happened, because I think it's critically important. I mean, it's frankly, it's crazy that that many people believe that, things that just simply aren't true, that they believe a different version of reality. But look, let's face it, there's been an amazing amount of disinformation that's been spread over the past year, and many people are consuming that disinformation and believing it as if it's fact. To think that the violent protesters who attacked the Capitol, our seat of democracy, on January 6th was just tourists, looking at statues, it's insane that anyone could watch that on television and believe that's what happened.
You spent January 6th fielding desperate calls to send help to the Capitol, but you struggled for hours to get approval from top Trump administration officials to deploy the Maryland National Guard. Have you heard from the January 6th committee? Have you been asked to come and give them information about what happened? And have you learned anything more about why that delay happened?
Interestingly, I have not heard from the committee. And as you're pointing out, I had a pretty involved role that day. I got calls from the leaders of Congress who were trapped in, the basement of an undisclosed location when they were whisked out of the Capitol, pleading for help. I immediately sent nearly 300 riot-trained Maryland State Police to the Capitol, and we were trying to send the National Guard, and we kept requesting up and down the flagpole from our Adjutant General and the Maryland National Guard, requesting the head of the National Guard to the Secretary of the Army. We were repeatedly denied approval to send the Guard. I called them up and activated them anyway, and kind of started staging them at the border of the district, ready to get the approval. And it took 2.5 hours before Ryan McCarthy, the Secretary of the Army, called me and asked for our help. And we immediately sent them in. I believe the Maryland National Guard was the first to arrive at the Capitol. The Maryland State Police came in right after the Metropolitan Police, and the Maryland National Guard came in right after the D.C. Guard. But it was hours, 2.5 hours late.
Do you know anything more in the year that has passed about why it took so long?
No, I mean, that I think is one of the things we need to get to the bottom of. You could give the benefit of the doubt and say it was the fog of war, there were miscommunications up and down the chain, or there's something more involved. But all I know is we required to have the approval of the Secretary of Defense, and we didn't get it.
Let's turn to COVID. You tested positive for coronavirus just before Christmas, even though you are fully vaccinated, you are boosted. And you're a prime example of the really frustrating phase we are in right now, when even people who do everything right, like you, can still get sick.
Well, yes, and I, luckily, because I was fully vaccinated and boosted, I didn't get really sick. I did, self-quarantine and isolate for 10 days, as we recommend everybody does, because I didn't want to get anybody else sick. But because I had that protection, I had sort of a bad cold. But what we're faced with now, unfortunately, this new Omicron variant is impacting just about everyone, including many people who are fully protected. But it's keeping them out of the hospital, and that's the thing we have to keep in mind. I mean, these vaccines were designed to help stop serious illness and death, and they're working beautifully that way, because right now we have 92% of our state vaccinated here in Maryland, one of the most vaccinated in the country. But we have overflowing hospitals, and so that 8% of the population who has not been vaccinated is responsible for 75% of all the people that are filling up our COVID beds in the hospital. And so we're still encouraging people to get vaccinated, to get those boosters, and we're taking all kinds of emergency actions to help our hospitals and our nursing homes, because here we are, nearly 2 years later, and it's like deja vu. We're faced with this emerging variant, very similar problems to what we had at the beginning.
Well, there are more than 2,000 COVID patients hospitalized in your state. And the Maryland Hospital Association warned this week that medical facilities are nearing capacity. You just alluded to that. Are you doing enough to keep up with the demand? Will you call in reinforcements like retirees, students, and the National Guard, speaking of, to help?
Yeah, so we've been talking about this problem for nearly a month and preparing for it, but you can't really manufacture doctors and nurses that don't exist. And frankly, these heroes on the front line that have been working so hard for 2 years, there's fatigue. There are people who are working in hospitals that are coming down and being infected. So we're taking all kinds of actions. We've already we put $100 million of emergency funding into our hospitals and our nursing homes. We waived requirements for out-of-state nurses and doctors and healthcare workers. We've sped up the graduation of our nursing students so they can get out early and get out to help. We've called up the Maryland National Guard. And we're continuing to take actions every day, nearly everything that anyone can think of to help us get through this. Look, we believe that the next 4 to 6 weeks are really going to be a terrible point in this crisis, and it's potentially going to be the worst part of the whole 2-year fight. And we're going to take and continue to take every action we possibly can to help our hospitals, our nursing homes, and to keep people safe. Our focus is what it's always been since 2 years ago, and that's trying to prevent hospitalizations and deaths.